Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm here with Judith, and today we're going to tackle the topic of separation agreements. So these are things that come up a lot on the financing side of things. Whenever we mention that you are going through a separation or you have been separated or divorced, it triggers a lender to automatically ask for one of these. And in some cases, there aren't separation agreements, and we'll talk about what we can do in those cases. But in this day and age, Judith, I think you'll agree that's one of the first things that you need to think about when you're going down this path. I mean, there's a lot of emotional things on this whole topic, but on the financial side of things, that separation agreement is top priority, I would say.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you're looking at selling your home, definitely, that's the first question I asked is do you have a separation agreement? A separation agreement is an agreement that you draft up with a lawyer, and that kind of tells you like where who gets custody of the children, how debts are going to be divided, how assets are going to be divided, how your home is going to be divided. And it also tells you, because it's not always cut and dry with 50% of your home being divided.
Yeah.
There's lots of things, aspects that go with that. And when a home is divided, you can have an inheritance in the home. You can have maybe the one spouse own the home before they got married, so it's not a 50%.
Lots of different situations where another
Yeah.
one can come in and buy, and it's like those details are going to determine. And I think one of the biggest things that I've seen in my career is people have come in to a relationship thinking that we bank separately, we keep our assets separately. In British Columbia, they don't recognize that. Also, there's like matrimonial home. So regardless of if you go and say that I've got 1% title ownership, you have 99, unless you have some form of agreement where you both agree upon this, once you're in the position of needing to divide assets, like in a separation, province and the courts will see this as a divisible asset, 50-50, unless you can otherwise show it. So I think we always, I mean, in a perfect world, we're going to walk into this with having this conversation. So before you get married, before you join in union common law, that's best practice, is to have these conversations. The best time to lay out a rule for separation in a corporation even is like, how do we dissolve this corporation? You want to do it when you're on good terms, right? That's best practices, but we've seen it doesn't always happen. And it's interesting because you mentioned, and this triggered a thought about how two parties, you go to a lawyer to have the separation written up. In BC, it's different because as long as you have two witnesses, you can drop your own separation agreement and it's considered okay, but lenders don't necessarily follow that. There was a push a few years ago where they wanted to see separation agreements signed by a lawyer, and people had to go and redo them because no lawyer is going to go in and have a look at a separation agreement that they didn't put together and then sign off on it, right? I've noticed of recent time, we've had less pushback on that. They're accepting more of these double witnessed agreements again. But I think, again, best practices is to visit a lawyer, because I think the concern from a lending perspective is that unless it's binding with a lawyer, one of the parties can come back, and it doesn't matter how long, they can come back and renegotiate. They have that ability, right?
I mean, with separation agreements, I mean, you can draft it yourself, or if you guys don't get, get along somewhat, you can also go to a justice counselor, which they'll put it together for you because you can't handle the lawyer fees. And you can, at the end, just go to a lawyer and just get it signed. So it's
like notarized, basically. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Have you had experiences where when you're trying to get financing, there was one of the forms of an agreement was unacceptable, and you had to go through this, or have you come across that?
I know a lot of people where they're like, they've done everything, they've had the child support, they've had everything, and now it's time to sell the home, and they don't have that written up in the agreement because it's been
not part of the agreement.
time. Yeah. So I always suggest you can always get a notarized letter, and that way it tells the lawyer the conveyancing lawyer, the real estate lawyer, how proceeds are going to be divided. And I think that's important. You don't always have to have a separation agreement, but just have something in writing that will state how the property will be divided.
I think that's one of the biggest pain points that we see anyways I mean, because that's what we deal with. We deal with the one particular asset, the house, when it comes to the division. Just a recent file that came across our desk. I have a client who's been a client for, God, almost 12, 13 years now. And she bought a property and then another property, and then she got married and bought with someone else. And we're buying another property now after a separation. And we also did a refinance when they were separating to do a payout. And this stuff wasn't agreed upon before. And looking at the payout that she had to make was a pretty hefty payout in comparison to what I think she felt and what we know that she had already built up and put in and brought to the relationship, right? It's not always equitable, and a lot of times it's painful financially. And the conversation we had about this was like, what the heck happened here? And, it was like, look, I just needed to get out of the situation, and the extra however many thousands of dollars, it just ended up not meaning as much, right? So again, I can't stress enough that if you are going into a relationship, especially when you're bringing an asset like a house in or proceeds from a house that you're putting up, it's important to have a conversation around this, or, I mean, better, have something in writing stating that you brought this into the relationship and how this is going to work, right?
Yeah, something I like to add too, just sometimes when you're in a marriage and you maybe inherit a house, I would definitely go see a lawyer as well and make sure that inheritance is separate than marital property, because once it gets to that point, if you do get a divorce, that you might lose that inheritance because you didn't
You
explain
didn't clarify that, yeah.
everything.
It's tricky too, because I've seen a situation where there's a matrimonial home. It was a townhome that a couple bought, and then one of the, I guess, parents had gifted, or they inherited a home, and so they decided that they were going to keep the townhome as a rental and then move into the home. And they stayed there for a few years, and then they decided that they were going to separate. So then one of the parties was saying that they wanted a piece of the home. And I don't know exactly what ended up happening, but technically, if you're living in that home, that's now the matrimonial home, unless you have some sort of written or agreement ahead of time, right? Or the other person agrees to it. And if they don't, then you've got a issue, and the only people that win are the lawyers, probably, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Lots of.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I had one other thing I wanted to bring up. I did have a client a long time ago, like must be about 5 years ago, and we ran into this problem where they didn't have a written agreement. They weren't going to buy a house afterwards. They were going to rent, but when it came to closing the home, they contacted a real estate lawyer to do the conveyancing on it, and the real estate lawyer said, well, they asked me a question. They're like, well, do they get along? And I said, well, somewhat. And they're like, well, we're going to have to, we can take one of them, and the other party has to find another lawyer. Why they did that is because they didn't want the couples to maybe have a disagreement and then have the proceeds of the home sit in their trust account until they figure it out. So
until they figure it out, yeah.
so that came into be of a bit of a problem at that time. But we ended up finding a lawyer, very rare, that will take on both of them, and we did. So worked out pretty good.
It's interesting.
Yeah, so that's something to keep in mind when you do the proceeds. Just some lawyers won't take on the full couple.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Just when you were talking, it triggered a story that just came to my mind as well. I think that a lot of times, from a lender perspective, they will, like, if you have a situation where, let's say you're in your 40s now and you were in your early 20s and you got married and there was no separation agreement, you were together for like a year or something like that, they will take what's called a statutory declaration, meaning you signing in front of a lawyer, swearing on an affidavit, essentially, that's what it is, that you don't owe any alimony or there's no spousal support or whatever, and there's nothing, no property involved or anything like that. And also, if you're in like your 70s or 60s and you're whatever it is, and you've got adult children that are not dependent and there's no spousal support, I think lenders will likely be okay with a stat deck as well. So it's situational.
Yeah.
If there is a property involved and if there is children involved, I think most of the time you have to swear that there isn't. Otherwise, we're going to require some form of agreement.
Yeah.
And just what just comes to mind with that is, again, it's cyclical, because during like the 2018 to like 2021 period, we were seeing less and less lenders allowing these statutory declarations. Prior to that, yeah, just get a stat deck, it should be fine. And it seems like they're easing up now. So you would think that, their actuaries and all the people that get paid, millions of dollars to save the bank money and protect their interests, they noticed a trend, right, during that period, possibly, and was exposing the bank to undue risk, right? So yeah, I mean, this is a topic that's can be really involved. There's not really any cookie cutter
No.
answer, but I think that one thing I do want to ask you is, in terms of, like, there's common law, and then there's marriage, and then there's separations, and then there's divorces, right? So what's the biggest distinction between, if there is one, a separation agreement and a divorce agreement?
Well, I mean, in a separation agreement and divorce, it's about the same thing.
It's a
I mean,
divorce decree, right?
decree, yeah. Well, it's a divorce decree and separation agreement. Well, the separation agreement, I mean, you can have any kind of agreement, just make sure that, I mean, it's important to have an agreement because you want everything laid out of what's going on and how things are being split up. Like you said earlier, it's like a business that you're dissolving. So have everything in writing. Very important.
And I think that with a divorce decree, that's filed, right? It's filed with is it provincial or federal? It's provincial. So it'd be filed with the court. Does that make it more final? Or because
it is, because if you have a separation agreement and say there's things involved like abuse or just a really nasty divorce, it's best to have it filed in the provincial court. You can do it in the Supreme Court, but provincial court's faster. And then if some things come up, like your spouse is not paying the child support, you can go to family maintenance with that being filed in the court
so
system. Yeah.
there's recourse versus,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah,
fair
exactly.
enough. So any other FAQs or should ask questions that you think viewers out there that are either interested in the topic or going through this should ask or frequently ask?
I mean, yeah, I mean, just like a separation agreement, when you go to sell a home, you'd have it all in written as well. So if you're showing a home, who's showing the home, who's taking care of that, who's on title, things like that. Also, where the proceeds are going, make sure you go see a lawyer and make sure that everybody's getting their fair cut. If there's an inheritance involved, if there's a prenup involved, if there's, I mean, even a third party. I had it where I had a client where there's three people on title. There was the spouse, the other spouse, and there was a mother that were all on title. So you have to make sure everybody's getting divided from there as well. So yeah, I think it's
So
as a buyout, but I think they ended up selling it afterwards.
interesting.
Yeah.
So I mean,
have it all written out. It's just easier. And it will,
the natural segue, maybe this will be our next topic, is the actual buying out of an asset as opposed to, and comparing it to a sale. But something just to follow up on what you were saying about the having it all in writing. Now,
Yeah.
do you feel, in your experience, is this like an absolute, or is this a yes or no, or is it depends? I think it might be it depends. Do they need to go and hire a lawyer right away? Do you think that, in your experience, people that have versus haven't, are you able to provide any odds of success, or is there like a specific rule of thumb that, in your experience, because I mean, you've been licensed as and practicing as a realtor since like 2011, and I think you've been specializing in this for almost a decade, right? So what have you seen, and is there some form of direction, if there's a user out there right now, or a listener rather, who's going through this and is at step one, like what would you think the best practice should be?
I mean, it all depends. Every divorce is unique. So all depends on how you get along. I mean, I've seen some couples where it's just, okay, we're done, our relationship is done. Let's try and figure things out and do things best for the kids. I've seen relationships where divorces where they don't get along, like they can't even be in the same room together. It all depends on your situation. I've seen couples just solve it, no problem. They're very compatible. They're very
Okay, so I think step one would be to see if you can solve it amongst yourselves.
yes,
That'll probably save you quite a bit on
yeah,
legals and other
yeah,
people getting involved. Failing that, probably best to get a mediator in place or something like that, and then maybe lawyers after, right?
yeah.
Kind of
I
final
mean,
stage.
there's lots of processes you can go through. You can go through a collaborative lawyer, which is a mediator. You sit down, you each have a lawyer, and you just basically mediate it out. Justice counselor is great if you're low on funds. You can sit down. It's a mediator. It's free through the government.
Is there a specific way that people can connect with them? Is there like a link that maybe we can put in the description or anything like that?
Every city has its own justice counselors, so you just
Okay.
have to Google it or look it up in the yellow pages if you're there, if
Okay.
they've come out anymore.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah,
I haven't seen one actually in a couple of years.
yeah, and you just give them a call and they'll ask you, can you guys be in the same room and mediate together? And that would be the first question they ask. And if so, I went through my divorce. I did it through the justice counselor. It was fantastic. It's very
So,
easy. Yeah. They help you with court documents as well, so they're great.
yeah, that's great. That's great.
Yeah.
Any last thoughts? Anything that you feel like we didn't cover that we should?
Oh, it's such a topic. I mean, we could be here for a long time.
Yeah, we could be here for a really long time. I think that we'll wrap it up. If there are specific questions for your needs, we'll have our information. Um, Best way to contact you would be, I guess, phone and email.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you want to hit me up, you can hit me up on Instagram. It's at the Mortgage Specialist, and we'll have Judith's information. We'll have it in the description in the description of the video. You can take a look at that. We'll have the links there. All right, I guess we will see you in a couple of weeks. Thanks for your time again, and have a great day.
Okay. Thanks.